call of the Duncanville Community and Economic Development Corporation order. It is 2 p.m. Okay, and we'll start with our invocation. If everyone will please stand. Okay. Gracious Father, we thank you for your presence. We invite you to dwell with us this evening as we take up the business of the city of Duncanville in this community. Your grace is sufficient, and we thank you for your protection and care over all of our citizens, right? Our business owners, our employees, the men and women of our public safety and public works departments. We ask that the decisions and the information tonight serve the purpose of advancing the well-being of our economy and the quality of life of citizens. And we ask these blessings in Christ, our Savior. Amen. Amen. And a pledge of allegiance by Board Member Mr. Harvey.
Okay. Will you join with me? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Texas pledge.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you. Thank you. May be seated. Okay. First item on the agenda is citizens' public forum. Right? Each citizen is able to make public comment. To submit a comment via email, it will be reviewed by the board. Following information is required. You submit that comment by 4 p.m. on Monday, March 31st, 2025. I'll ask staff if we have any public comments.
We do not.
Okay, that brings us to item number 2, which is board training and presentation by Brandon Shelby, our council.
All right. Good evening.
Yes, sir.
And can everyone hear me if I said that? I can stand for the second one because it's all on the screen. This one. And just the arrow advances?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for joining me tonight. I was asked to do some board training generally on EDCs and then more specifically on the Open Meetings Act and how it applies to not just you guys, but to everyone that the act applies to. This is a work, not a meeting. We'll get to that during the open meetings part. But since there's no set agenda for my presentation, feel free to interrupt with questions. I'll have a time at the end for questions if you want to ask them. I'd rather be a little informal about it, and you guys just, if you see something up there, if I say something you have a question about, feel free to go ahead and ask it. I will promise you this: I will do my best to answer tonight, and if I go home and think about it and I didn't give the best answer to your question tonight, I know how to get a hold of you. So, the Texas legislature in 1979 passed the Texas Development Corporation Act of 1979, allowing municipalities to create nonprofit corporations to promote economic development. Back then, it was a little different than it is now. The legislature did not pass any authority for these new nonprofits to collect taxes. And they did not set aside any state tax money for these nonprofits. They relied on private donations and into the public and the goodwill of the citizens to try to get something started. But they were very popular, and in 1987, Texas voters passed the constitutional amendment allowing tax money to spend on economic development for the first time. In '89, the legislature amended the act to add Section 4A, which allowed for local tax money, and that's how it sits today. You're still allowed to pass local up to on the percentage. It's in the slides for later, but you're now funded solely from local sales tax money. And in 1991, the Section 4 was added, which you guys are a 4B corporation called Type B now, and that expanded the allowed use of tax revenue It's now codified in section 501 through 505 of the local government code. EDCs are also authorized under the Texas Business Organizations Code, Chapter 22, the Nonprofit Corporations Act. You have all the same powers and abilities of a nonprofit. The nonprofits aren't allowed to levy taxes, and you guys are. So we get into the differences between a type A and a type B EDC. The main difference is under which section of they are authorized. Type A is generally more primary job focused. With type B, you get a little bit more flexibility. However, you can see by the chart I put together, they are very, very similar. Type B is allowed in all cities, so there's some restrictions on type A. They both use corporate tax. They both have to file articles of incorporation. They're both governed by the same five sections of the local government code. Both have bylaws. They're a public subdivision. They're both bounded by the city limits, and there's the way they're taxed. It's either an eighth, a fourth, or 3/8, or a half of 1% sales tax. You can use as much as you have room for if it's not being taken out other taxing. The biggest difference, other than the types of projects you guys can fund, is the make board. And a type A EDC, there are 5 board members, all appointed by the city, and they may be city council members. There are type A EDCs that it's essentially just the city council that's running the EDC. The type B, you're limited on the number of board members or employees you can have on, or number of city employees or officers you can have on the board. You must have 7 members appointed by council unless there's a vacancy on the board. Both types, the city council, and later, the city council can't control the EDC, but they can control the EDC because all the board members of the EDC serve at the will of the council. Type A, you can't exceed 6-year terms. Type B, you're all set 2-year terms. And the way this board was set up, those terms are staggered. We have more than 20,000 people, so you all have to live in the city. Or don't have to live in the city. Just like a type A, all your expenditures are authorized but require city council approval. And just like type A, the conflict of interest and local government code does not apply. The conflicts of interest are covered in your bylaws, I believe. If not, they can be. You don't get compensation, and a quorum is the majority of the entire membership, and because we ask for it every time we have a meeting. Type A, EDCs do not have to have a public hearing for their projects unless they're doing a type B project. And there are certain situations where type A, EDC can do a type B project. You guys have to have at least one public board project can spend money, and then you have to have a 60-day waiting period to fund that project after it's been approved. Both type A and type B projects require a performance fee. What can you spend the money on? So a type A EDC can tax to fund the provision of land, buildings, equipment, expenditures, targeted infrastructure, and improvements that are for the creation and retention of primary jobs. Those are jobs like factory and manufacturing jobs, research and development, military facilities, recycling facilities, distribution centers. Generally, it's places that would be a primary breadwinner or employee or for a household. Type B, you can do all the same things that a type A can do. So you guys could be funding for those primary jobs also, but you also can do more quality of life things and examples include sports facilities, park facilities, events, and entertainment and tourist facilities, and affordable housing. And you guys know from being on board, that's the primary thing you guys do, or these type of community building projects. And that's because you're a type B corporation and have the ability, and people will seek that out. The authorizing unit is the city. So these are the sections 501, 051, and or in section 451, these are the steps that he goes about to form the corporation. And all of these steps exert some sort of control over the corporation. They create the corporation, they approve the formation, they appoint the board of directors, approve the bylaws, and they have to approve all programs. The municipality can't even lend you guys money without having a contract authorized by the local government code to do so. But do you have to follow the rules of the city? One of the reasons cities seek to set up economic development corporations is because you have more flexibility than the council to do these sort of things. You are subject to the Texas Open Meetings Act and the Texas Public Act, but you're not subject to the conflicts of interest portion of the local government code. You're not subject to the procurement requirements in local government code 252. You're not subject to rules governing the sale or lease of property in 53, GC 53 and 72. We got into this recently with the Toyota property. The EDC has more flexibility in the way it can just sell land or fund projects. The city has to jump through certain hoops in the local government code. Now, just because we don't have to follow all these rules doesn't mean the city of Duncanville can't come to you and say, we're going to write it into bylaws that you're going to follow these rules. And that's one of the things I'm into now with the drafting of the procurement policy is the city wants to review everything, they want their hands in it, they want to ensure that the rules you guys follow are the rules that they would want you guys to follow. But that's their prerogative because they're the authorizing unit. Can a city spend your money? Attorney General in 2003 said the act provides that the governing body of the city that has created a development corporation will approve all programs and expenditures of the corporation. It's authorizing the governing body to disapprove programs and expenditures, but the act does not authorize the city governing body to spend the development corporation's sales and use taxes. That's a long sentence to say they can't tell you how to spend your money, but they can tell you how to spend your money. Because ultimately they approve who's on the board and they approve every project that you do. The EDC does have some control in day-to-day expenditures. The city, they have oversight, but they're not coming in and telling you to pay your rent or pay people's salaries. And this was some case law in Gallup versus Amarillo Economic Development Corporation, basically saying the same thing. The city ultimately has control over the EDC, and while the act does not give the city total control, they have control through their appointment power, removal power, and the approval of projects taken up by the board. Since the city has control, there are certain good practices for an EDC, and I think this is what Victor and Marcella and Coy are working toward. Oversight and tracking of projects, and the main way this is done is through using encumbered accounts that to track the money from year to year. It's also important to keep track of marketing funds. The EDC is allowed to spend up to 10% of their yearly budget on marketing, and if you don't spend that, that can be carried forward into the next year. And the rules on what the marketing is spent for are give you a little bit more flexibility than the projects, because the marketing is not a project. So the money you spend on marketing is not a project that must be approved by the city council. Your marketing budget is approved during the budget process, but you can undertake projects that aren't, or undertake spending that isn't exactly projects through your marketing budget. There's a famous case, I don't know how famous it is in EDC sections, or EDC in municipal law, there's a famous case involving the city of Hutto. The EDC purchased a giant hippo statue, and people were upset about it, but they used marketing funds to do it. So there's a giant concrete hippo in the city of Hutto that made some way. I studied in law school. It was about marketing funds.
I do have a question.
Yes.
So with the marketing funds, is that stuff that we can use, are those funds we can use for the arts?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of a way to spend
Okay.
marketing money. Anytime you're going to have your logo on a T-shirt or a sign or or something like that. That's marketing funds.
That's,
Yeah. So all those sponsorships should be coming out of your marketing budget, so it doesn't encumber project funds.
okay.
And then we're reminded again that the EDC programs and expenditures bylaws are all approved by the city council, so they ultimately have some control. A lot of the focus of the EDC is on projects, but there are a couple ways to spend your money that are other than the obvious, someone coming in and asking for it.
Mhm.
And the best tool for an EDC is really real property. Because you have that flexibility when it comes to moving real property, you don't even have to sell real property for fair market value as an EDC. You can use that real property. The value of real property is actually an expansion of your budget as an EDC, because you can, if you're doing a project, you can sell that property to a developer for less than fair market value. You can also lease long-term lease instead of selling it at all to create another revenue stream. When you invest in real property, you're placing it back on the tax roll. Like I said, you get into long-term leases or selling if you prefer that. And you can spend funds on property without a performance or limitation to make it shovel ready. So the property that the EDC owns that's not ready to market, you can use your EDC funds to those shovel ready without creating a project that has to be approved by the council. And then when you give grants, financial grants to people and just write a check, those are a little bit harder to recapture should the people go into default and break the terms of the agreement. But recapture provisions on property are much easier because it's physically there and you can take it back. Yes, sir.
Brandon, you mentioned that the DCEC is able to sell in certain instances the property for less than market value. Does that also mean, or could that also be a situation where the DCEC could, quote unquote, give the property away or subsidize the cost of that in exchange for a project that meets various economic development goals and objectives? That it doesn't necessarily have to sell it, but it could be part of incentive, if you will?
Of course, a city would have to auction property, basically take bids and take for the property. But yes, you can give it away below market value, all the way down to zero for a project. And you'll see most big industrial projects, the EDCs either giving that property at a substantial discount or giving it away completely. Or if the business owner already owns the property, the EDC and the city are entering into, or the city will enter into property tax abatement agreements. The EDC will do that. But yes, to answer your question, you can give the property away if it's bringing in well, you're a type B, so it doesn't even have to be bringing in a primary employer, but if it's bringing in a primary employer, that's the commonplace for an EDC to give us either a steep discount or even free. Another way to spend EDC funds without that aren't necessarily primary employer or project that are partnering with through education and training initiatives. We partner with school districts or community colleges, establish learning options or satellite locations. And the EDC can fund not only these programs, but the land and infrastructure needed for these programs to get started. You can directly fund training initiatives for primary job employers. That means if you have industry in the town that's looking to expand and they need money to implement training, the EDC funds are available for that also. I got a little ahead of myself. That's the next entry was exactly that. You can partner with businesses to do on the job training, and the example I used was welding initiatives. that's the EDC portion of our program tonight. Any questions related to that? Or any more questions, I guess?
I do have a question, and it's just more, so as long as we rationalize that it is marketing or a project, there's room to inquire any other considerations that we may have.
You guys have, at Type B, you have really wide net that you can cast for what you can spend your money on. The Type A corporations are kind of hamstrung. If it's not creating jobs, they can't really do it.
And the reason I asked is I have, and y'all may flip since then, but remember, there was an app, and I cannot remember the rationale, but it was to provide money for transportation for something to and from airports.
For an
to the
event.
Hilton, yeah, and how we found a workaround, but where we weren't gonna support it, but we put it back to the hotel. Do you remember how it fit into this?
Yeah, the funding stream was the hotel occupancy taxes.
Okay.
But this was unique because the hotel was the applicant, right? It was the organization who was having their event at the local hotel, right? So that was one. I mean, commonly, again, the hotel is our partner, and so the amended application saw the hotel apply for, reimbursement, ground transportation, their event where they're gonna provide shuttle service or whatnot. And it just made it cleaner because it was
Okay.
EDC and Hilton Garden Inn doing business event that was gonna generate more hotel occupancy tax as opposed to an outside, organization that was having an event at a local hotel, and that's what I remember.
And the hotel occupancy tax, hot funds
Yeah.
are a whole separate
Yeah.
ball of wax.
Yeah.
And I understand in the past that the EDC maybe oversaw the hotel occupancy tax
Short
funds.
period of time.
But, well, there's a reason it was because it is, they are two totally separate revenue streams. And those taxes can only be spent on certain things. And your sales taxes can only be spent on certain things. But around in that situation would have been, if they were looking for a travel sponsor for that event and you had a bus, slapped a sign on the side of it, that would have been a little bit of a workaround. So I don't know, I think the question was probably more of how are we using hotel occupancy taxes?
No, I couldn't remember the intricacies of the hot was
Yeah.
missing from my memory, but I do remember we had a question that we're trying to figure out, and ended up putting it back to the hotel. So when that came, that just made me think about it, so thank you for refreshing me.
Much cleaner that way.
And so I had a much longer presentation prepared. It was mostly about how an EDC is formed, what the language has to be on the ballot, and I don't think you guys need to know that because you're already here. But and I don't think you're going to change to a Type A because of Type B. So
At the last meeting, we had a redevelopment grant application before the board regarding an owner and renovation of residential units and vacating private property for the purposes of public benefit, and some question from the board about the use of corporation funds to participate in an endeavor like that, and questions about how do we navigate through that as a board, because most applications that come before the board, at least my understanding has been, for commercial purposes, industrial. Granted, this is a large residential project that one could say that it's more on the commercial end because there's just so many units, so many buildings. But if you don't mind, can you walk us through, because you had mentioned that Type B just has, more, just casts a wider net, but in a situation as it relates to residential development, how does that come into play?
So really the only residential tool the EDC has is when it comes to affordable housing. And there are certain, and that's a Type B project. You can do projects that relate to affordable housing, but that is a more, that's gonna get in the weeds a little bit. And I don't think necessarily this project was that. I don't think I had in mind, applying for a federal.
Yeah, he wasn't coming in asking for a resolution of support for his application for, let's say, 9% tax credits.
Yeah, and I just,
But
we
the
don't wanna go
EDC
too deep into the actual merit of the application, but just the question, the applicant or the engineer is still not really comfortable having that,
Sure.
dialogue about the specific, but as it relates just to application on the residential front, you know, what is allowable, what isn't it? You started off by saying, you know, a project like affordable housing.
Affordable housing, and that specific situation last week, I think, it's in a arts district, or on the border of an arts district, and the EDCs are allowed to, expend sales tax funds for, enrichment of cultural districts, like that. I was trying to dance around it without discussing that project specifically. It's hard because that was such a unique project, and the biggest one that we were talking about was actually something that the EDC really didn't have much control over. The big selling point of that project is that he's going to give right of way to the city, or land to the city, private property to the city to do public improvements for that crosswalk. And that's something that the city council will have to consider, because that's not EDC's realm to do those public improvements. Although you can do public improvements if it's going to benefit, enhance tourism or enhance those art tricks and that sort of thing. It's not a project that's outside your purview, but it is a $2 million project and that would put strains on the budget, especially while we're trying to clear out these old projects that didn't really, that the funds have been set aside, but they haven't been funded. And we have several of those that we're working to. But yes, as a type B, you can fund sorts of projects if you feel they will enhance tourism or enhance the culture of your city. I think that's another reason you guys got the gym, field house, because you are allowed to fund projects like that as well, professional and private and amateur sports facilities.
I will follow up on Victor's question. So how would, consider if the local government code is saying, you know, type B corporations are limited to funding affordable housing projects as a residential classification? We have a project, Main Station. It has a residential component, but it's, I guess what we call in the industry a mixed-use development,
Yeah.
right? So not exclusively resident. Is that an example why that project still meets the allowable, eligible expenses type B corporation, as opposed to it just being purely an affordable housing projects, whether they're using tax credits or just we're targeting low mod, income renters or owners?
Yeah, 'cause mixed projects are just that. They're mixed use in the retail component or the industrial component or the professional office component. Those projects allow you to fund them.
On the note was the same note about the residential. Can you speak to the community development or improvement objectives that any type of residential project would be eligible for under the type B?
You're talking about like the programs you guys have funded that bring houses that are substandard up to code, that
Yes.
sort of thing? Yeah, because you're able in those types of projects because enhancing the beauty of your city does attract residents and attracts people who want to work here, businesses. The more people you have living here, businesses you can support. So if you're bringing blighted areas up to that could fit into your objectives as a type.
And the focus with that is to ensure that they're owner occupied.
piece.
It doesn't have to be, but I can see where that would be a policy, because otherwise you're just enhancing somebody's rental portfolio. And if, and you're looking to improve the quality of life for residents so that they stay in this community and work and spend sales tax in this community. You ready to move on to the boring part? The Texas Open Meetings Act. I'm sure you guys have all had your Texas Open Meetings Act training.
It's not good.
You are, as a new board member, you are required to take that training. Is it yearly? Victor, I believe.
That's my understanding.
Believe it. So you guys should know everything that we're about to talk about, and we'll breeze right through the Open Meetings Act training. Texas Open Meeting Act is Chapter 551 of the Government Code. As a general rule, bodies meetings must be open to the public unless a statute expressly permits an executive session. The premise of the act is citizens are entitled not only to what the government decides, but to observe how and why every decision is reached. That is why the deliberations are in public, the vote in public. The purpose of the Open Meetings Act is transparency in government. Who's subject to the act? You are subject to the act expressly by statute, section 551.001. You and a host of all these other people are subject to the Open Meetings Act. The act applies to every regular, special, or called meeting of the government body, even executive sessions. That's why we have an executive session, and an executive session only. We have an open and public meeting, move to executive session, move back out of executive session, and close in public meeting, because all meetings that the body such as yours are open to the public. Quorum is the general rule for quorum is a majority of the governing body unless otherwise defined by applicable law or rule. For you guys, it is a quorum of the 7 of you. So if 4 people together in the same place like you do right now, this constitutes a quorum, even though this does not constitute a meeting, because you're not going to be deliberating. We'll talk about that in a meeting. A meeting occurs when a quorum of the government body gathers and either discusses public business or the public business that the governing body has authority to supervise or oversee is discussed, and a member of that body participates in the discussion. So just because there's a quorum together and business discussed, it's not necessarily a meeting unless somebody participates. If the gathering is called by the governing body or the governing body is responsible for the gathering, a meeting occurs when there's a quorum, public business is discussed, and you receive information. So if you receive information or from a third party or participate in the discussion, it turns a gathering into a meeting real fast. The act does not apply to selections or regional, state, or national workshops if the government body's public business is not discussed and no formal action is taken. This is for lack of the word local being in there, a regional workshop for you guys discussing EDCs and open meetings. Develop a habit of asking yourself, is this a meeting? I know that Marcel and Coy and Victor do this all the time. If we're going to have a few of you calling or talking or coming, we ask ourselves, hey, is this a meeting? That's why, under the utmost of caution, we even published an agenda for this gathering, even though it's technically a workshop, not a meeting. A quorum of you guys are together, so we posted the agenda, we opened it to the public, and even had one public show up.
Yeah.
So, but anytime you're asked to get together with other EDC members, just know that Victor and Marcella and Coy and I have asked ourselves, is this a meeting? Notice Requirements Act requires written notice of the date, hour, place, subject of each meeting held by the governing body for both open and closed sessions. And you guys aren't in charge of putting the agenda together, but we can't just say, hey, we're gonna have a meeting. We might discuss projects. That's on the agenda. Each project is specifically outlined with sufficient detail for the public to decide if it's worth driving down here and sitting in a meeting to on. Actions taken without proper notice are avoidable. So if we don't properly notice a meeting and pass and approve a development agreement, any interested person, including news media, people from other towns, friends and enemies, can file a court action to stop or reverse the action to EDC. In practice, this rarely happens because all the EDC would have to do is have another meeting and pass it the right way. But if it does happen, the court may assess costs and attorney's fees to the prevailing party. Present requirements for open meetings. A meeting may not be convened unless you have a quorum present. We all know that. Members of the public have a right to attend. The ADA has certain rules, and we may adopt reasonable rules to maintain order in a meeting, including those relating to the location of recording equipment. And that's not talking about your recording equipment. That's talking about the general public's recording equipment. Like I've been to a few meetings here. We haven't had a whole throng of press, but that can happen. And if it does, you can tell them where they need to stand with their cameras and microphones. The act requires political subdivisions to allow members of the public interested in speaking on the agenda to do so before or during the governing body's discussion of the item. Now, we've discussed this internally. Your policy is actually your public forum policy is actually pretty broad compared to what it is. The only requirement for public comment, and actually it's fairly recent, it's in the last decade this has changed. There did not used to be a requirement to allow public comment at meetings. That was up to the who was running the meeting. 2 years ago, the legislature passed a requirement that said you must have a public forum session on your agenda if you're having an open meeting. But the wording is interesting, and it's in the purple. You must allow members of the public interested in speaking on an item on the agenda. So you can limit their comments to items on the agenda if you so choose. We don't do that here. It's more open than that. We let them get up and talk. But just so you know, if you already have set rules that they can only discuss on the item, and of course you can rules that limit the total time allowed to speak, and but you cannot discriminate against their speech based on the position taken or any potential criticism of you or the in general. If they do choose to speak on something that's not on the agenda, you can hear them out because your policy allows for that, but you may not engage in discussion with them or deliberate the item. You may issue a statement of fact, a statement of policy, and agree to a proposal to place that on a future agenda for deliberation. Closed session. Who may attend a closed session? Only the governing body's members have a right to attend a closed session. This is a topic that's come up in our meetings about amending the bylaws. Because the way your bylaws are written now, the mayor, city manager, and members of council are allowed by your bylaws to attend executive sessions. And that's allowed by your bylaws, but that's not the state law regarding that. You're allowed to be more restrictive on who you allow in. You may include others in a closed meeting if you want. If the topic of the closed session, if someone's able to contribute to that discussion, you're of course allowed to invite them in. But you may not admit a presence that is against the interests of the governing body that closed meeting is not to protect. And against the interests, it's kind of I've struggled with how to phrase that because, of course, you're not going to let are against your interest into a closed session, but you also are not allowed to invite. If you're entering a closed session to discuss an economic development agreement, you aren't allowed to invite the applicant into the closed session. Because the applicant, for purposes of the closed session, their interest is against the government, against your interest, negotiating with them. Even though you may want to give them the applicant, or may want to grant the agreement, and you want their business in your town, it's not proper to allow them into a closed session because those negotiations need to be in public. Your strategy for those negotiations is private. Commonly used exceptions to the Open Meetings Act. These are I didn't put all the exceptions in here because there are many that you won't be using as an EDC. But these are common closed meeting reasons to have closed meeting: real property deliberations, exchange, lease, or value of real property, if it would have a detrimental effect on the position in negotiations with a third person. I think that's kind of clear why you would deliberate in closed session about the value or sale of real property, because especially as an EDC where you're allowed to just market that property and take below market value for it, your reasons for wanting to do that or where you set that value are definitely something that should be discussed in closed session. Personnel matters, to deliberate the appointment, employment, value of a public officer or employee. To hear a complaint or charge, an officer must be conducted in open session if the employee requests a public hearing. So I've been doing this I've been doing municipal law since 2006 or 7, and I have never, well, maybe once, had a personnel matter where the person being discussed said, you know what, let's take this outside and let everybody hear why my employment is. The reason personnel matters are discussed in closed session is the constitutional privacy of that employee, and just basic decorum for the governing body. This one's important to you guys: economic development. You can discuss financial information that the governing body has received from a business prospect. You can discuss the plans for that prospect. You can deliberate and offer a financial or other incentive or to a business prospect that meets those requirements. You can always discuss those in closed session, because when you're deliberating incentive agreements or grants of property or money, your reasons behind wanting to do that are things that probably should be discussed in closed session, and the legislature has decided that's okay to do. Another one is consultation with attorney. You can't just talk to your attorney about anything in closed session. Like, just because the attorney's there doesn't mean you're allowed to have closed session. But if you're seeking legal advice or you're talking about litigation, you definitely want to take that into closed session, because it affects your negotiating position and it affects your strategy on future or pending litigation. Just general policy matters, like I said, those questions need to be asked in open session. However, the legal advice gets triggered faster than you would think on just general policy, because if general policy discussion is not allowed in closed session, but the implications of following policy, implications of changing policy are certainly something you can consult with an attorney in closed session. The governing body may hold a closed session if you fit one of the exceptions to the Open Meetings Act, but you have to have a quorum, you have to convene an open meeting like we said, announce you're going to closed meeting, identify the section, and you see Marlon and I were discussing what section we're going into closed meeting about, and then you can't take a final action or vote in a closed meeting. So if any action is going to be taken resulting from the discussion in closed meeting, you have to have that action taken and the vote on that action taken in an open session. And a lot of boards will kind of look around the room and try to take a straw poll in executive session, but you can't ask a person how they're going to vote once that action item will back up in open session. It's improper to ask them how they're going to vote in closed session. A certified agenda or recording must be taken of the closed session, and the recording is confidential. I don't know, many people do it here. And a certified agenda is basically just the list of the topics that was discussed today, very general in nature, because having detailed minutes of the closed session or a recording of a closed session available to the public without a court order would defeat the purpose of moving into executive session. Act requires the governing body to keep a certified agenda or recording of the closed meetings. The meetings must announce why you went into closed session and any action taken outside of the closed session. A brief summary is always required because verbatim transcript for the purpose of the closed session, like I said. And this is for general meetings. This is for the open meetings, not the closed session. A government body may hold a meeting by teleconference if you're consulting with your town, maybe a closed session. And if emergency or urgent public necessity exists, to convene in court in one location is difficult and possible. Some specific government bodies are authorized to meet by telephone conference. You are not one of those government bodies. Each meeting must be audible to the public at the location specified in the notice of the meeting. So having a meeting on a teleconference, you also have to have a physical location specified where if the public shows up, they can hear what's going on the teleconference. Video conferencing may be allowed in government body may participate remotely by video conference when these requirements are met. The video and audio feed must be broadcast live. The member of the governing body presiding over the meeting must be present in a physical space that is open to the public. So at least one person has to be, the person governing the meeting has to be in the public. And then a quorum of the governing body has to be physically present at one location of the meeting. That means if you're video conferencing in from multiple locations, quorum has to be at one of those locations, and someone has to be in physical space that's open to the public. The notice must specify the meeting location as well as intent to have a quorum present at the location. Prohibited communications. These are what's called a walking quorum, and this is what we're going to discuss now: is walking quorum or an illegal executive session. Those are just two different words for the same thing. The member of the governing body commits an offense if you engage in at least one communication among a series of communications that each occur outside of a meeting authorized by the Act and that concern an issue within your jurisdiction, and in which members engaging in individual communications constitute fewer than a quorum of the members, but the members engaging in the series of communications constitute a quorum of members. And you knew at the time you engaged in the communication that it would involve quorum and would constitute deliberation once a quorum of members engaged in the series of communications. So that's a really wordy way to say, be careful discussing business of the board outside of meetings with other board members.
Question. If I jump in.
Yes.
So, do we make a habit, like, I'll give you an example, because there's several occasions, whether it's show, business event, I think about maybe it's the Chamber's annual awards and State of the City address, right? Where we might effectively have a quorum of members. It could have been our meeting where we're less than a quorum, but we're gathered and we all serve on this board. In other cities I work for, we would just always, as a habit, we publish a notice of possible quorum. We might have members of the city council or board, a ribbon cutting or groundbreaking ceremony. There ain't no agenda, but hey, we're letting the public know that there's a potential of possible quorum, even though this is not a meeting. Is that sufficient, or what does that effectively do as it relates to this requirement?
So, nothing.
Okay.
It doesn't, but a lot of boards make a practice of doing that, and it's not a bad practice because we've all had open meetings training. We're having open meetings training right now, but the public generally is not studying the Open Meetings Act. They know just enough to raise an eyebrow. So I understand both sides. I understand you don't want to make it look like you're trying to have a meeting by publishing notice of a meeting, even though you're not going to talk about anything. I also understand, in the interest of transparency, saying, hey, there's going to be one of the EDC at this ribbon cutting or at this city event. It just depends on your. It's a matter of choice, right? Publishing the notice with no agenda, notice of a quorum, no real agenda, doesn't get you out of an open meetings violation if you were to show up and talk about public business. So, because you didn't publish the agenda, you just published notice that there's gonna be a quorum. If a quorum gets together and discusses public business at that social event, yeah, you run the risk of it being illegal executive session or a walking quorum because you haven't noticed what you're gonna be talking about. But I do like the practice, or don't dislike the practice of letting the public know that there's going to be a quorum here. Just out of the abundance of caution, we're letting you know that we're not gonna need city business, there won't be any deliberation, but we are gonna have a quorum
And
present.
we don't have an agenda.
Right, so we can't
That'll
talk
be
about
kind of
it.
six.
But it doesn't get you out of a violation of the Open Meetings Act, to that notice. But as we're discussing now, unless you're trying to violate the Open Meetings Act, you're probably not violating the Open Meetings Act.
Yeah.
Just, unless you're knowingly discussing business and asking people how they're gonna vote, you're not violating the act. And to prove a violation act would be very difficult, and not many people are gonna be willing to take that on. I don't know of any lawyer that would be willing to take it on, because I guess, if somebody was gonna pay you hourly to prosecute the EDC, you might do that. It'd be a difficult thing to prove, because you have to prove that you knew when you were talking about it, or they have to prove that you knew when you were discussing it, that you were discussing city business, and you knew that ultimately a quorum of your board was going to get involved in this series of communications.
Randy? May I ask one question?
Sure.
One of the things that's come up in the past discussions I've had with different people about things is, boards and all. This walking quorum also is involved. If I call you on the phone, and I talk to you, and then I call Marlon on the phone, and I talk to him, and then I call somebody else on the board, and I talk to them about the same thing, then I'm knowingly doing a walking quorum, because I'm talking to these people, different conversations, but it's cumulative. I'm a board
Okay.
member, okay? If I'm not the general public, I'm a board member, and I'm calling another board member, and then I call another board member, and I'm talking about the same thing. My understanding was that was the real reasons for this walking quorum was people assisting votes about things, but not as a quorum as a whole, but a cumulative quorum.
Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about here, is what you discussed, a series of phone calls. That's a series of communications with less than a quorum, because those are one-on-one conversations, but when you take them all together, it adds up to more than a quorum. That is essentially an executive session, because you have a quorum discussing business without the public that hasn't been published. So it's an illegal executive session, or it's known as a walking quorum. Now, you as a member of the public, you can call all the members and ask them their opinion on things, and that's fine. It's the members talking to one another about things that there's a potential violation of the act. I, as the board's attorney, I could call all 7 members and discuss something, and it wouldn't be a violation of the act, because as long as I'm not telling each member how the other feels, I can talk to them about the same subject without having a meeting. Staff members like Marcella and Victor, they can call board members and discuss public
Because
business.
they're not a board.
Because they're not on the board, they can't make decisions for the board. The way I have been taught to think that is, if the board is a wheel or is a circle, me as the attorney, Victor as the director, Marcella as EDC staff are like the spoke in the wheel. And we can, we're the center. So we can talk to each of you, and you can talk to us, just as long as you're not taking that discussion out to the outer of the wheel. And even if you do talk to each other at these social events, it's not a meeting unless there's deliberation by the board. So the big important to ask yourself when it comes to that is is deliberation. And deliberation means a verbal or written exchange between a quorum of body and another person concerning an issue within the jurisdiction of the governing body. So it means you're actually discussing board business and, you know, your opinion and how you might vote, or is that economic development prospect a good one for the city? If any time your discussion gets into those kind of topics, you need to be either here in open session or here in closed. Keep social functions, so, you know.
I have another question, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a more practical scenario, right? Because I find a lot of times with maybe some of the more complex development proposals, I feel like sometimes the board is at a disadvantage. I think Mr. Harvey, just to use your example, because we made eye contact, right? The first time we hear or are able to digest a complex development proposal, ideally shouldn't be at our board meeting, right? But that creates a dilemma because, you know, staff, you know, can't convene a quorum that's in a published or notice meeting. So my question would be, would we still be able to comply, right, with the Open Meetings Act if, say, for example, before we got to a fully, you know, vetted development agreement, before the terms were too far down the road, we could maybe meet with maybe 2 board members or any quantity less than a quorum to just say, hey, we've got this proposal headed towards the agenda. Wanted to kind of brief you, get some feedback prior to it being placed on the agenda, because now once it's on the agenda, like, we don't want to be in here negotiating a deal in public. We've got applicants right here, we got staff, we may have had questions that we may have liked to kind of engage with prior to the meeting. That's something that, you know, I recall in the past being a practice that we use with staff, board, council, et cetera. If we get a grouping less than a quorum, individually, whether it be, you know, virtual or in person, depending on the availability and schedule, then that way we know this is coming. We've had some context or preview before it's placed on the agenda, and now we're being asked to act on a resolution or terms, not having really had the benefit or engagement with staff prior to that.
It's a very common practice
Okay.
to do this, and it is allowable as long as these small groups,
Yeah.
as long as the discussion had in these smaller groups isn't shared with the other smaller groups. So if you were meeting with EDC staff, if 2 on this side of the table meet Monday with the EDC staff and discuss a potential project coming up, and then people side of the table will come on Tuesday and discuss it. Neither of those are a walking quorum or a legal executive session, unless, you know, on Tuesday, the staff goes, hey, guess what they said yesterday? Because then the deliberations of your group are getting passed along to the next group, and that creates the problem of the quorum. But the situation you described is perfectly legal and in practice in cities and EDCs everywhere, school boards everywhere. They have, I used to work for a city as the house city attorney, and they had groups of 3 members up there every day meeting with the city manager, and he called them my group of 3 meetings. And he would get together with them. It streamlined the process because that's the reason this particular city manager was doing it, is, you know, he would meet with them months in advance of the actual budget workshop. And so when they're seeing those slides at the budget workshop, it was the first time they were seeing it. And that made that budget workshop day just flew by, because they'd already seen that stuff before, and they had time to prepare their questions and decide whether or not they're going to ask those questions in public. It does create you are arming the board with information, so I mean, I think it's a good thing, instead of having them come in blind in a meeting. But do remember, you don't have to have those if that's the first time you're seeing an open meeting, you don't have to have those deliberations or discussions about economic development or real estate or personnel or legal matters in open session. You can always move to closed session and hash it out in there and out and with all your questions answered. And some EDCs will do that. They'll have a meeting where the closed session, executive session, is all the new prospects that they haven't discussed yet. They'll discuss those in closed session, and then at the next meeting, bring those out into open session and have a meeting. That's doable too, but that adds another, we're only meeting once a month, that adds another 30 days to the timeline for a project to get passed. Your hand up, I just had to get my thought out.
No, that's okay. And I guess I was thinking in terms of maybe there was a standing of the board that would have periodic reviews of projects and those questions. And then when it's presented to the board, all of that is presented at one time. And it's kind of like what the council does with the finance committee. The finance committee will meet with the auditors and they'll go over all that stuff. And then when they come to council, then they say, okay, the audit is ready, it's a clean opinion. Finance committee has looked at, various aspects of the audit. The auditor has explained to them. Finance committee, recommends blah, 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 and the council votes to, approve, votes to accept it. And so I was just wondering in a scenario like that, where if you have a standing committee that a board that routinely does that sort of thing, they can have working sessions in which they would go over all of the aspects of the proposal. Is that something that could be done ad hoc? Would be like a closed session?
A closed session of just the meeting?
Just that committee?
That's the whole purpose behind committees. That you hit the nail on the head. That is why that's why councils and boards forms committees of less than a quorum to put business forward and to get things done without the requirements of posting notice and posting an agenda and having a meeting in a public place. It's very, very common for boards and councils to form committees to handle the business of the board in a more efficient manner, so it's not all new to everyone at an open meeting. An issue of the people that aren't on that committee are seeing it for the first time. But if you're a board that and you put people on the committee that you can trust the opinions of, that's a great way to handle business and to work within the confines of the Open Meetings Act without having a violation. Now, the committee can't, if you have a committee of 3 board members, all it takes is for one person to pick up the phone and create a walking quorum once that committee is met. But again, if you're not deliberating or voting, it's not really a meeting. The walking quorum is not really a meeting unless you're deciding public business, so it's proof.
If you're going to be effective doing this sort of thing, you have to exercise some sort of discipline.
Right, certainly.
So,
Any more questions? Well, this concludes our lesson on the Open Meetings Act. I'll see if I can apply for some sort of CLE credit for you guys. And I think we have a budget presentation now. There's nothing more exciting than Open Meetings Act except for budget.
but before you yield to our staff, I would like for you to check into that because I haven't done it yet in terms of the training. So
Oh, okay, well, yes, I certainly will.
So it's a purely selfish request on my part.
Well, I got CLE credit for developing, self-study credit. I can do so many hours a year, so.
There you go. There you go.
It's hers. Oh, let's see.
Lisa, mind if I sit too?
Yes, you may. Please.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Jennifer Odie, so I do work with the city, and I work alongside staff of economic development, so it's nice to be here for you. So before I get into the slides here, I just do want to say that the purpose of tonight is not to get into the weeds of the budget. Been talking with Mr. Barrera about, we'll have a follow-up work session in the very near future, hopefully. We can actually dive in further into what's actually in the budget, what should be, what shouldn't be, having y'all's input into it. So this is really just kind of talk to you at a high level, kind of what the process is and what the process should be, I should say. It involves your role here on the board. So the first thing I wanted to highlight as we talk to council, as we talk to staff, as they're building their operational plan, because we're in that time period where we're starting to build budgets. It's very important to highlight the goal really of building the budget really should be a strategic alignment with the higher level type plan. So we're working on a comprehensive plan as we're getting the feedback from the community about what the long-term vision is for the community, what that vision is. So anything that's set here, whether it's the DCDC or whether it's our operational budgets, the city council helps put together, it really needs to have that cohesiveness and that strategic alignment with the comprehensive plan and as well as any other longer term plan. So in here might be a strategic plan, if y'all consider revisiting that. That would also need to be in alignment to what we put in the budget. Again, should just, like I said, be in alignment with the strategies and the comp plan. So with the budget planning cycle, it's just an annual cycle. We start about January and February in kind of the planning phase when we start talking to staff. We start building the budgets at the departmental level around this time, March to May, and then it goes to the city manager budget at that point in June, July period. We have to file it with council by July 31st by city charter, the city budget. So what the DCED's role in your budget process is you would be having this planning session about now, actually earlier in the calendar year, talking with staff, collaborating on what your goals are, what is it you want to use the money for, does it align with your goals and your objectives that you set as a board for what you want to spend on. And so you would be having those planning sessions already by now, and then working with, again, Mr. Barrera and his staff to help build what that budget would look like. And then I believe in your bylaws that you have to approve the CEDC's budget by the end of June. Okay, and so I would have that approval. It wouldn't be the first time you see the budget or anything, because y'all have already worked through that budget and have already set those goals and everything. And then it's kind of incorporated into the larger city budget. At that point, is the city council. It's that budget in September, and then our fiscal year starts in October. That's generally how it should work and how y'all should be involved in it. Don't kind of have any questions about the cycle when it comes to the budget? Does that make sense? So again, Mr. Barrera and his team will be working with y'all in terms of a future meeting very soon in terms of workshopping more of the budget as we're prepping the annual budget. So Mr. Shelby's kind of already alluded to sales tax, but so how does the economic development get funded? It is through sales tax. So as you know, for any funds spent here in the city, we get charged 8.25% sales tax on those eligible type items. So 6.25% goes to the state, and the other 2% goes back to the city. And how that breaks down, so 1% actually goes into our general fund. Another 0.5% goes towards property tax relief to keep the tax rate lower. And then the remaining 0.5% there is economic development, so it's the your portion. To kind of give you a bit of what the last 7 years has looked like in terms of the sales tax that we have received, and see that it hasn't been a sharp incline there, but it's been pretty steady. So if you compare from 2018 to 24, it's been about a 25% growth. since 7 years ago. So currently, your portion of the sales tax, is just a little under 3.5 million is what we're collecting annually. And to give you an idea of how the sales tax breaks down in terms of the industries, I don't know if you've seen this kind of information before. We do partner with a company called HDL. They do kind of sales tax analysis on our behalf. We can certainly provide more information to you in the future of kind of what our sales tax generate look like. So in terms of the industries within the city limits, our largest generator fall into the retail trade. So that would be your grocery stores, any clothing stores, department stores, things that in that nature, because that's by far the largest industry in the city limits. It's been a challenging, I would say, looking at the last year in terms of this. As consumers have, since COVID, been very much into the online shopping, and so that's kind of has hurt the mortar and box stores, as we call them, brick and mortar stores. But the prospects, at least through the company HDL, has projected about a moderate increase, maybe 1%, in terms of what our forecast might look like going into the future this year.
Yes, I was just thinking when you mentioned like with a lot of the e-commerce activity and we'll say brick and mortar point of sale transactions, how do we treat those transactions when a purchase is made? Like, is it the point of sale? Like, I don't think we have any fulfillment centers here in the city of Duncanville, but let's say if we did, would we be able to collect whatever sales tax included in those eligible purchases because they originated like from our brick and mortar fulfillment center?
How it works, and I can't speak, I'm sure Mr. Shelby or even Mr. Harvey in his experience could probably speak to this, as it has been a big to-do in the last few years, I guess, at the legislature in terms of like, is it point of origin or is it point of, who is it being shipped to? So like the Amazon fulfillment centers and things like that. So we do get, some of those online sales, but we certainly don't have fulfillment centers, where they get shipped to and then shipped out. So a lot of those cities probably invested a lot, in having those gigantic warehouses and things where things get shipped there, and they see a lot of benefit to that. So of course, when there was doubt at the legislative level a few years ago about changing that, where it should be all, I think whoever bought it, that's who should get, the city limits should, or the city should get those sales tax dollars. But of course, they had a big group, don't want to do that, we'll lose a lot of revenue kind of thing. So I'm not sure if that's really quite settled out, but,
I know I'm not sure how that settled out. I know there was a lot of discussion about it. Cities benefit from also from the property taxes, which is all the employers' tax.
But I will, go ahead, Mr. Harvey.
I guess bad news, good news. Bad news is that since I retired, I haven't kept up with that stuff. But I can tell you from my past life, there's a company called Medline that has a fulfillment center in Wilma. You familiar with that? And they were getting a huge chunk of sales tax under the rules that were operating at that particular point in time. As a matter of fact, they were that community's largest sales taxpayer at that particular time when I was keeping up with all this stuff. But I think I don't know where it is right now in terms of did that dispute ever get involved. I suspect the legislature has been preoccupied with other things.
But we definitely do, I would say, I've seen the breakdown, we definitely do get some sales tax from online sales, but not significant as some of these other cities. But anyway, that just gives you a general idea of how our streets break down.
So I do that one question.
Yes,
about this,
ma'am.
sorry. So you're saying currently in Duncanville, there's 49% of our taxes come from within Duncanville, has it? Okay.
And the lodging services, obviously, that's like more of the hotel, the utilities. But yes, 50, it's on 49%. So again, Mr. Shelby, as already kind of alluded to, and forgive my time with 4B, it's type B now, but kind of reiterating what he's already said in terms of, since we are a type B corporation, what you can spend the funds on, economic development side, that's what he talked about, in terms of things that promote businesses, promote jobs, job growth. So this is right off of the state comptroller's office, pretty much verbatim. So, but just to give you an idea of the project of what you can use the funds for, so you have your economic development side, and then of course you have community development or quality of life side. So park facilities and public parks and transportation, affordable housing, all those kind of things you kind of already talked about, fall under that quality of life category. So when we look at our current budget, at least how the current operation budget is built, there pretty much are four different divisions that we are tracking. So you have your administration portion of the budget, which of course goes towards the staff, economic development staff. It goes to any costs that they might have, like for travel and for training. It's also where we talk about the marketing budget, for example. The marketing budget is housed sponsorships, things like that. They build out the administration portion of the budget. You have the business incentives and special projects. That's how we fund all the different incentives that you've granted to different businesses for signage, landscapes, variety of things. Also, in that category is where we've funded the support of the field house, for example, to pay their debt, which we made their last payment in February, so. The third component has been the beautification budget, so we've done things for beautification of the city and right-of-ways and off the highways and things of that nature. And then new to FY25, we had added some signature events. So that was like Christmas, that was July 4th, Mexican Heritage kind of events. So it's really like the four basic, how we have it aligned on our chart of accounts anyway, how we set up the different divisions within economic development. So when you read the financial reports, for example, they'll be listed out. Here's your administration section, here's your beautification, and so on and so forth. To show you a 7-year history just of our expenditures, as you can see, it's been kind of up, it's been down, it's been up, it's been down the last 7 years, with this past fiscal year being obviously the largest in the last 7 years. A lot of money's been for investments and incentives and such. So what you're looking at here, I believe, might have been provided to you in the past for financial reports. So it's kind of a summary sample. So what we provide or what we can provide, so are used to seeing more on personal businesses and stuff, more of like an income statement. So this is really more of a rolled up version. Like I said, we have different components to your budgets. So we provide this every month. This is actually a snapshot as of the end of February. And being February is the 5th month out of the fiscal year. We kind of have a gauge there of a percentage used to give you an idea of, are we on target, spending ahead, are we spending behind? So 5 months in the fiscal year is about 41% of the budget. So what you see here is you have your revenue line, which is mainly sales tax. And we do get some investment income off of economic development funds with the city, investment strategy, and so we'll allocate investment income out based on the different funds and what funding. Something to note about sales tax that I should have mentioned is that sales tax is actually paid 2 months in arrears, when what that means 2 months behind. So we account for the funding the month that the sales tax was collected. So if you purchase something at the grocery store in the month of October, the city does not actually collect or get that payment until December, because it takes the full month for the collections to happen to the date, and then for them to the businesses to file their report and before the city actually gets the payment. So we count that 2 months behind. So when you see the revenue looking like it's behind. Behind it's because we collected 2 months behind. But by the time the fiscal year is concluded, it does catch up. Those months do get accounted to the current year. So anyway, you have your expenses section. So you see what the budget is, so we budget 3.5 million in sales tax, but there was 4.8 million allocated in expenses. So that's obviously costs of 1.2 million, but you also have fund balance, or you have money in the bank per se, that can help offset that as you're using these funds, again, your business incentives and objectives, so. The next column is what we've spent to date as of February. So again, like I said, because revenue is 2 months behind, it takes a little bit to work to catch up, so it shows that we're 925,000 in the loss. And then the far column there, as you see, just kind of, again, gives you the gauge of how much has been spent. So if your target is 41% and we've spent 38%, then we're on track with the budget. But essentially kind of how to read this, and you would sort of see this too on income statement as well. You would see your revenue, and you would see your expenses, and you would see your net loss. So we also could provide that where it breaks it out by the expense categories as well, so it's not seen in the rolled up version. So, but this is some of the information I believe that is given to you during your meetings every month.
Question, John.
Yes, ma'am.
Carryover.
Yes.
Is it happening? Is it carried over on the same line items for the next year's budget? Or
So,
is that different?
We did mention about encumbrances, so we do encumber the fund, so if there's a project that's been awarded, we'll enter that into the system, so say if it crosses over the fiscal year, because again, October is the start of a whole new year, everything is passed on an annual basis, those will carry over knowing that, because an ongoing project has yet to conclude, so, that does carry over. It's not really shown here because I'm only showing you what's actually gone out the door. But yes, there's a column I hid in this graph here, but the purchase orders that we have, or what we have in reserve for those things. And we also have been providing to you a list of the grants, so you can see what's in progress, what's been completed, what's been spent on. So if you've been seeing those in your packets. I didn't provide that here, but we were keeping on top of the grants as well. Do you have questions kind of about this or any? A lot of information to see.
I have one question. So like normally with the city's budget, when we're going through that process, we'll vote out an amended budget for the current fiscal year and the proposed budget for say FY 26.
Mhm.
That would be the same exercise that we'd be doing with DC. Okay.
Yes. So I should say, like, what the next steps are, again, we're trying to get into the details of the budget just yet, but, you need to have that workshop, where you will establish your goals and your objectives, what it is that you want to see in the budget, how you want to spend those funds, and then we're going to build the budget accordingly, based on that input. Possibly having with council, as you can present that information, and y'all can discuss, so make sure y'all are on the page, so they're not changing it per se, after the fact, and then have it approved by the end of June. That's what will be proposed to council. Anything else y'all would like to know at this point?
Mr. Harper, you can step out. Any questions, comments on that?
No, I think it was a very good presentation.
I did some quick research on the online sales, if you want to
Sure.
know what I found. It's very clear that if you are an online seller located in Texas and you sell something to a purchaser in Texas, you pay the sales tax of wherever the purchaser is located. It's not as clear if you sell it outside the state or if you're from outside the state and you sell it, because each state has their own sales tax rules and every state is trying to grab that tax money. If I am an online purchaser and I purchase something from California, I'm supposed to pay a use tax, but I can offset that use tax at California sales tax because of their rules. So the answer is it's very confusing. Unless you are buying online from somebody in Texas. then it's not as.
If I could kind of double back to myself, one thing that I'm really hoping to see one day is, in my peculiar way of looking at things, I see the annual financial report as a connecting link between two budgets. And so the budget is, of course, what we intend to do. And one of the things that's included in the budget is the commitments that we've made to in the community in terms of what we want to see them do. So I'm looking forward to the day when we can take the beginning fund balance for a particular year, and then the ending fund balance of the subsequent year, and then reconcile those two fund balances. And that way, I think we can know by project how much is still owed on the commitment that we made to a particular vendor. Because there are times in which we make a commitment to a vendor that crosses fiscal years. And so it's kind of easy to lose. I can see where it would be easy to lose track of that. So that's just my Christmas wish for staff.
Okay, well, we have completed the remaining items for our agenda tonight. Is there any other, excuse me, any questions for the board? For the good of the board? Okay, hearing none, we'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay. Properly moved second. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. We are adjourned. It is
7:32.
7:32 p.m.
Is that a record?
Since y'all are adjourned, I'm public